Hey everybody, welcome to my channel. I'm Dr. Carrie Ann Perkins, a board-certified OBGYN, and today we're talking about how long does it take for a yeast infection to go away. Thanks for being here. Let's dive on in. By the end of this video, you'll understand what yeast infections are, how long they take to go away, how we diagnose yeast infections, and the treatment options that we have for treating a yeast infection. So let's talk about a yeast infection. These are very, very common infections. In fact, the CDC states that of all females in the reproductive years, about 75% will experience at least one yeast infection in their lifetime. That's a majority of people. 75% is a lot. So if you have had one or you suspect that you have one, don't feel crazy about it. It is completely okay and completely normal. The good thing about yeast infections is that it is not an STD. Yeast normally lives in the vaginal space. It's supposed to be there. It is actually really protective to help to enhance the function and to reduce bad pathogens or bad bacteria and problems happening in the vaginal space. So it's a good thing for it to be there. However, a yeast infection happens when the yeast overgrows. So think of it as this. If you are supposed to have 100 yeast, which is a fungi, okay, in the vaginal space, you may have 500 instead, and that would be a yeast infection. And so you'll know that this infection exists because you'll start to have symptoms. What are those symptoms? Well, itching. That's probably the most common one. You'll feel itching by the vulva, by the labia, the lips, and with that you may have some irritation and swelling. And so sometimes you could just be walking or you touch the area and it just feels very inflamed and irritated. That's very common for a yeast infection. You may also notice that your discharge may change. Now, the typical description of a yeast infection would be a very cottage cheese like discharge. So it's thick, clumpy, white, and really sometimes if that infection is pretty severe, it actually may have two different components. One where it's like on the thicker side and another where it could be a little bit watery at the same time. And so on your underwear, you'll notice that this kind of discharge is coming out. Now, in general, I would say I wouldn't recommend that you go looking in the vagina, searching for a yeast infection or this discharge. You shouldn't have to do that. In general, you really want to leave the vagina alone, right? So we don't want to put things inside of it. We don't want to wash inside of it. You just want your vagina to just completely be on its own. Now, if you're getting an exam, that's a different story. If you're having sexual activity, that's a different story. But for regular hygiene, you really don't need to explore and go into the vaginal space too often. On the outside, by the vulva, that you will wash and clean and maintain regular hygiene with, and you can look there. And sometimes the yeast infection, you can see the evidence of the discharge on the outer lips, and that's normal. That is completely okay. Now, if you do take a look down there, I would recommend getting a mirror and getting like a flashlight. Some people use like the light on their phones to take a look. And so when you look at the labia, the vulva, you may notice that the area looks very, very red, okay? The tissue is just reddened from being inflamed. That could be a sign as well. But it's not very specific to a yeast infection. So if your only symptom is just having red inflamed tissue down there, don't be alarmed or think that it's automatically a yeast infection. However, if you do have the itching and you have burning and redness, the likelihood is pretty high that it could be a yeast infection. So how do you get a yeast infection diagnosed? The easiest and the best way is to see your provider. So go to the doctors, have them take a look. And so when they're taking a look, they're going to do an exam down there. And so this is a speculum exam, and it's very similar to what you would get when you're doing like a pap smear or when you're going for your wellness visit or your annual exam. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. All right, so this is a speculum, okay? And so you're probably very well aware of what a speculum is. And so this is the device that is used to help to open the vaginal space so that we can see what your discharge is like. We can collect a sample if necessary. We can do testing, things like that. And so with that, this is a disposable speculum. So once this is used, we discard of it, we get rid of it. And so I have my little plush here, because you know I love my models. And so this is a very super enlarged vagina, okay? So a couple of things before we actually do the speculum portion of things. I'm gonna put this on the side. When we speak of the vagina, we're not talking about the outer parts of the genital area. We're talking about the space on the inside of the vulva. That's the area that is red on my model here, okay? Everything on the outside that touches your underwear, that you wash, and you should wash on a regular basis, those are your vulva or your labia, your vulva lips, okay? So when we say don't wash the vagina, we're not saying don't wash down there. The vulva, these, you wash them quite well. This is the clitoral hood, you wash this entire area, but do not put anything on the inside of the vagina, especially when you're showering on a regular basis. All right, so let's jump back into the speculum exam here. Okay, so speculum, when you get to the exam, will be inserted into the vaginal space. And so this is how it looks. So the doctor will put some lubrication on the speculum first to make sure that it's going to be very slick. And we insert it into the space. Once we insert it into the vagina, we open up the speculum, and we do that by pressing on the handle here. And then it gives us a very nice view of the inside walls of the vagina. Now, when you have a yeast infection, the walls on the inside, instead of it being all red, as this model shows it, your insides are not red normally. But for the purpose of our discussion today, instead of the walls being red, the walls would be coated with a white cottage cheese-like substance. And so with that, literally think of it as just like the walls being painted white when it should really look red. So now that's your speculum exam. Once we're done collecting a sample, the speculum will be taken out, discarded, and then we can start the treatment process. Now, part of that diagnosis can be waiting for the lab to give us a full report of your discharge, what it's made of, what kind of yeast is there, how many different types are overgrown, all those details. And so some providers may want to wait until that report comes back before starting any treatment. And that can really take literally maybe 2 or 3 days for some labs. Sometimes it could take up to 1 week for you to find out. Now, for other providers, especially those who are so familiar with yeast infections, treating them, they may look at your discharge and automatically say and identify the fact that there's yeast present or a lot of yeast present. And so when those providers essentially get to that diagnosis right away, we can start your treatment right away. And so you really want to have that discussion with your doctors to kind of determine how you'd like to proceed. Do you want to wait on the results, or do you want to get treated right away? Now, some people are like, listen, I've had a yeast infection before. I know exactly what it's like. I don't need an exam. Can you just send me treatment? While this is not the preferred way to go about getting treatment, it's always best to be tested first, and I'll tell you why. Some providers might be comfortable with just giving you the treatment. You know, there was a study that looked at a lot of females and asked them placed them in 2 different categories: those who are familiar with a yeast infection because they had one before, and those who are not familiar with it by experience, but they've learned about it. And so they tested their ability to self-diagnose a yeast infection. And I was startled, because I thought in the group, for those who have experienced it before, that once they would have the symptoms again, they would correctly identify it. And only 30% of those females correctly identified when they had a yeast infection. And for those people who never had one and tried to guess whether or not they had a yeast infection, only 11% of them were correct. So that is to tell you that even though you're maybe so certain that what you're having, the symptoms that you're having, an infection that you're having is a yeast infection or something else, it might not be. It's always best to go and speak with your provider, talk with them, have it tested, so that you're saving time, you're saving money, you're saving energy, and you're accurately treating things from the beginning rather than guessing, okay? Let's dive into the treatment. There are 2 different treatment options for yeast infections. The first is treatment by over-the-counter meds. Most of those are antifungal medications. Fungal medications work best for a fungus, which is what yeast is. And so with that, you can purchase this over the counter. There are options of using a suppository versus a cream. This is placed directly into the vagina. And depending on the treatment option you select, you may have a 1-day treatment, a 3-day treatment, a 5-day treatment, or a 7-day treatment. The difference between all of these treatments really is how strong the dose of medicine is in the pack that you got. So for instance, if you get the 1-day treatment, it is much simpler because you apply or you place the suppository once. It's a very strong amount of antifungal medication. And so it will really cover you for several days versus the 7-day option, which has a shorter or a smaller or a lesser strength. And so you place it every single day for 7 days, but it's just not as intense. There's no right or wrong. They both work, or all of them really, work very, very well and will treat your yeast infection. The second option is getting a prescription for a pill called diflucan. This medicine is a one-time pill, works pretty marvelously, a very tiny pill. You take it and essentially within the next couple of days, you will have your treatment. Now, patients will say to me all the time, well, Dr. P, does it matter which one I use? And I usually say no. It really just comes down to your comfort. Do you feel comfortable placing something in the vagina every day or multiple times at night? Or do you prefer to take a pill? Versus others who are just like, some people hate taking pills, and it doesn't matter how small or how large, they just don't like taking pills. And so it's your preference. They both work great. Now, what I would tell you is that either option will start to work within 24 hours of taking them. They start working pretty quickly, but your symptoms might not go away completely until about 7 days after you started the treatment. And so it doesn't matter which direction you go. Either one will start working almost immediately and will cover and treat and cure your yeast infection. So I hope you've learned something today. I still thank you for being here on my channel, having these discussions. Listen, if you'd like to share your experience with yeast infections that you've had, treatment options that you've had, share it so others can learn and be able to be motivated to not only try different things, but to understand the process. So go ahead and share a comment below, like and subscribe to the channel if you feel as though this resonates with you. But I do have a free offer for you as well. If you click the link below, you'll be able to get a free copy of my hormone book, Hormones Don't Lie. And in this, we explore the hormones of our female system and how we can best navigate it so that we can live our best lives. Go ahead and click that link below. Again, I'm Dr. Perkins, and thanks again for being here. It's my pleasure to share in this knowledge, and I hope that you've learned. And we'll see you next time.